Welcome to today's episode of our podcast, Hear Us Out. Today we're going to be hearing all about a very interesting scheme that's been going on at Lancaster University, where ethnic minority students share their views with senior teaching staff. So, we've got Beth with us today, and we'll be finding out all about this project. Why did you decide to do a project with students from ethnic minority backgrounds?
So it all started when we were on a team away day, and on our away day we were just looking at some of the kind of data that comes out of universities and just discussing it as a team and thinking if there's anything that as a team we needed to look into or kind of address. And one of the things that really stood out, we were looking at attainment data. So this is the likelihood that you are to get a particular degree result, so a first or a 2-1. And one of the things that really stood out for quite a few of us on the team was that even when you control for other things like what your A-level results were or your gender or your age, UK students from Black, Asian and ethnic minority backgrounds are 8.9% less likely to get a 2-1 or a first than white students. Wow. And we were really taken aback by this. We were like, how can that be? And then we looked into it further and we kind of drilled down into the data, and there's actually an even bigger gap between UK white students and UK Black students. Wow. And this is actually quite shocking. So the gap here is 18.4% less likely to get. Exactly. So a few of us on the team were just like, it really opened our eyes. We hadn't really come across this data before. We hadn't really thought about it, and we were just like, oh my goodness, we need to do something. We need to contribute in some way to looking into this. So we put our heads together, and our first thought, as for most people with kind of academic background, our first thought was like, right, we need to research the reasons why, we need to find out what's going on. And so a couple of us decided we were going to kind of go away and look into it. And we started reading reports, some national reports, and also some reports from Lancaster. And we realised that actually there's already been quite a lot of research about the reasons, and that whilst we don't have one answer as to what is the reason, we have some pretty good clues. And the research is pretty clear that actually a kind of real mix between institutional and organisational racism and also individual experiences for students from various different backgrounds on campus or on different campuses at different universities, that this contributes to a really different experience for students from ethnic minority backgrounds, and that is very likely to be behind the reasons, because these are students who are getting the same A-level results, they get the same grades, they come in on the same number of UCAMPS points, but they're less likely to come out with those top grades. Wow. So there's something going on at the university level. So we kind of like, okay, so probably know enough about the reasons. We probably don't need to do another research project here. Yeah. That's kind of already been done, and we don't think it's very worth it just to go over the same ground again. So we were like, okay, we need to do something a bit more practical. What could we do that starts to address this? Now, a bit of background about our team, like we're not very high up in the university. We're learning developers. We talk to students every day about kind of issues they're having with like coursework, writing, revision, just stuff to do with learning, basically. Yeah. So we do spend a lot of time talking to students, but we're not the most high up people in the university. And we often kind of think that we're not really sure how we could really change a whole universe, just a few of us getting together. But then I was thinking, but we do talk to students a lot, probably more than most of our academic colleagues who have maybe like 250 students in a module, massive lecture theatre, really under a lot of pressure, spreading themselves quite thinly, teaching a lot, researching a lot. They don't have a huge amount of time. Whereas in our job, we're really lucky that most of our appointments are 45 minutes to an hour. We often see students a number of times. We kind of get to know people. Yeah. And we have this chance to really talk to students, basically. So I thought, okay, how about we try and give that chance to our colleagues? So when they're designing modules, when they're designing assessments, when they're designing courses, they have that kind of experience of really getting to know some students at the back of their mind.
Yeah.
So that was kind of the inspiration. Okay, so we're going to somehow bring together academic teaching staff who are kind of in charge of making courses at university with students from ethnic minority backgrounds and get them to basically somehow have conversations together. So that was the vision. I was like, right, this is what we're going to do. But again, I wasn't really sure how we were going to do this. And I was actually at home talking to my husband about, I've got this idea and I'm not really sure how to do it. And he was telling me about something which they do at where he works. And he was like, there's this thing called reciprocal mentoring where ethnic minority staff talk to like senior white staff and they kind of exchange their experiences and it helps the senior staff kind of make the workplace more inclusive. And I was like, that's it. That's what we need to do. We need to somehow set this up in a university. So then, of course, I did my typical thing. I went and did a bit of research and I found out that actually this has been done at a couple of universities. It's not widely known. It's not a big talked about thing, but there are a couple of universities, you know, I mean, this is obviously a couple of years ago. There are a handful of universities that were already doing this. So we got in touch with some colleagues at a different university and we kind of read things on the internet and reports and we basically tried to find out as much as we could about how to do it. And we decided that is what we're going to try and do. We're going to try and set up a reciprocal mentoring scheme at Lancaster.
Wow, that is lovely stuff. And so I'm hearing the word reciprocal, I'm hearing the word mentoring, and my brain can't quite put those two things together. So obviously with mentoring, you normally imagine that you've got somebody basically advising or counselling someone else. So how do you now make that process reciprocal? What does that look like?
So that's a really good question because it took us a little bit of time for us to get our heads around what this even is and how to actually kind of set it up. But basically reciprocal mentoring is this idea where the two people involved in the mentoring process, they learn from each other. So it's not like one person who's more experienced or higher up sort of helping or mentoring someone who's more junior. It's actually two people. They might be, you know, one might be more senior or whatever, but they learn from each other. So it's not like a one-way flow. It's actually a two-way learning process. And that was actually really important to us because there is something else called reverse mentoring, which is where you flip normal mentoring on its head and the junior person teaches the senior person. So again, that's been done in a few organisations. But again, the more we looked into it, we thought, hang on a second, there's a bit problematic in terms of the type of students that we were working with and also just the whole area where, and again, you know, there's this idea that it's not up to the people who've been disadvantaged to fix the problem. So they shouldn't be like, don't want to put it on the students to basically educate and teach the staff. It can't be just one way from students to staff. It actually needs to be two-way. So obviously the students do hopefully open the staff's eyes, but also they need to get something out of it as well. So it's got to be reciprocal. So as soon as we started kind of looking at all these different variations of mentoring, we realized that was the one that had the best fit.
How did you go about ensuring that the scheme was truly reciprocal in nature, especially since it does almost naturally lend itself to having a power dynamic just because of who's involved? How did you kind of build in a safeguard to ensure that there really was that reciprocity?
So do you know what? This is actually probably one of the most challenging parts of designing the scheme was how to make it genuinely reciprocal. And as you say, you've naturally got a power dynamic. You've got staff who are older and they are being paid. And you've got students who are often either younger or, you know, they're less experienced about university. So we're kind of thinking, all right, how can we turn that on its head? And there's a few things that we did. One of the most important things we did, which again is kind of unusual for this kind of scheme, is that we decided that given that the staff were being paid to have these conversations as part of their normal job, that the students should be paid as well. Now, this is interesting because as a team, we run a few other mentoring schemes and actually all our mentors are paid on those schemes as well. So we thought, well, hang on, this isn't any different. So we're going to make it a job for students to apply for and also get paid for. So then we thought, okay, so now it's a job. Now we're starting to get to a stage where there is actually benefits for the students. They're getting paid, but they're also getting experience. So it was, you know, a competitive selection process. So they had to apply, they had to write a covering letter, a CV, we had job interviews. And then during the training as well, we brought along someone from the career service to kind of draw out some of these employability skills that doing a scheme like this involves. And obviously you're talking to senior teaching staff. That's not the kind of opportunity you get every day to kind of have these longer conversations and to be in that role where you might actually be opening up their eyes to stuff. So that in and of itself is kind of really amazing experience to go forward. When you go into your career, you might be in a meeting with kind of like, some senior leadership person, and you might need to get your point across. So we felt that there was something here to do with experience and employability that we could kind of pull out of the schemes for the students.
Yeah.
So we got Hannah from Careers to come and talk to the students about how to explain on your CV, how to articulate this in a job interview about this really unique experience. So that was another kind of really important element. And then at various points in the schemes, we did ask the students, do you feel like you've had any of your employability skills kind of developed? Can you think of any employability skills that this might feed into? And so we really tried to make that sort of a thread that ran throughout, was this idea that because it is a job, it does give you that experience and employability further down the line.
Nice. Thanks for breaking that down for us all. And so how did you go about actually setting up this scheme? What is the structure? What does it look like in practicality?
This was actually, again, something we really had to kind of really think through. And actually, at first, we weren't really sure how to make a scheme like this reciprocal. So one of the things we decided to do was hold some focus groups with students. So we did 3 focus groups with, I think, 24 students initially. So we just literally opened up these focus groups to anybody who felt that they were from an ethnic minority background. Obviously, we let people decide if that applied to them. And we offered them the chance to come along and just tell us what they thought about reciprocal mentoring as a concept, what it might look like here at Lancaster, our kind of initial ideas for how the scheme might work and who might be part of it. And we had 3 really amazing conversations with students from right across the university about their feedback. And I think it was during the last focus group, we had this really interesting conversation. People have been really sharing their experiences of talking to academic staff and what it's like, maybe talking to your tutor or having those kinds of conversations. And what was really interesting this focus group is that suddenly someone came up with the idea that actually, instead of just having one student trying to explain something to a staff member, that actually it would be much better if it was 2 students. So your classic mentoring is like one-on-one, but the students in this focus group were like, do you know what? I'd feel so much better if I had another student with me, and I wouldn't feel that there would be so much of that power dynamic of staff and students, and the students feel kind of, a little bit inhibited to speak out. And so as immediately that someone came up with that idea, the whole room was like, I really think that's a really good idea. And I remember looking around at my colleagues going, I never would have thought of that. And how are we going to do this? And kind of just so just my eyes were open to a whole different way of potentially doing the scheme. And I remember we were like, okay. And it was just, there was such an atmosphere in the room of like, oh yeah, this is what everyone thinks is a good idea. So we took that idea away and we're like, right, okay, we're going to have 2 students and 1 staff. We had a look at all the books about mentoring. There is nothing. This is not something that's normally done. I don't know if it has been done anywhere else, but certainly not in any of the books. And we were kind of like, okay. But as soon as we started thinking about it, we thought, actually, it's not that big of a deal. We often have conversations with more than one person, and that the benefits in terms of making the students feel more comfortable, almost like disrupting that power dynamic a little bit, having that backup. We just thought, we got to do it. So basically, that was a massive kind of change from our ideas of doing something very traditional, 2 people sitting together, having a chat, suddenly it's going to be a trio or a 3 people conversation. So that changed things a little bit. And then we had to think about, okay, so what are we going to do? And most mentoring schemes, you can just tell people to get on with it. But actually, most mentoring schemes nowadays, they do have a bit of structure. They have usually some training. And also an event at the beginning where everyone gets to meet each other. And then obviously you say, okay, go and have some meetings, have your discussions. And then we also had this other thing of, we were like, okay, we need to kind of know what people talk about because we want to capture some of the great ideas, hopefully, that people are going to have. So whilst obviously it'd be wonderful if they just go and have their chats, and we obviously can't listen, but we do need to somehow capture anything kind of interesting or any good ideas that come. So then we were like, okay, we need to have some sort of check-in points through the scheme. And we also need to check it's going okay for people and that, everyone's happy and everyone's getting along. So then we put some events in the middle. So we had a midway check-in event where we kind of got everyone together and found out about their experiences. And then we had some evaluation at the end to try and capture those ideas that come out of the scheme about changes that could be made to things at the university. So that's kind of how the scheme sort of structure panned out. Yeah.
Well, that's all we have for today. So thanks for listening, and we'll catch you on the next episode of Hear Us Out.